So Elon Musk is officially launching a new political party. He wants to call it the America Party. Basically, it's a new tech right party, fracturing politics on the right as we know it further and further. I said recently at our conference that my prediction, many people said, hey, you know what, I think we're kind of through the eye of the storm and a lot of the division and fracturing might be finally behind us. And I think that most of it is actually ahead of us. The reality is this division and petty squabbles and fracturing and balkanizing, these kinds of things are actually a luxury of the side that's winning in the macro 30,000-foot view. When we were on the ropes, 2022 in many ways was kind of the high watermark for the left. Gay rainbow flags on everything, transing all of your kids. Parents are losing their kids to the state, having them hijacked and taken away. BLM was ruling the day. That was kind of, the right, the conservatives were on the ropes. And at that time, we needed all hands on deck, and people were just kind of in survival mode and willing to be co-belligerents with people that otherwise they wouldn't have that much in common with. But because Trump has won the recent election so handedly, now I think part of what we're seeing is that those on the political and cultural right have realized that we now have the afforded luxury of picking our particular convictions, particular virtues. And so what's happening is a further fracturing. MAGA will probably not be quite as broad as it once was. And Elon Musk is a big part of kind of leading the way with this fracturing on the right. The problem is, although he's calling it the America Party, first and foremost, he is not American. He may be an American citizen, and in many ways, at great personal cost, he did a lot to try to help our country. And for that, we are appreciative. But at the end of the day, the guy is a South African. What does it mean to be an American? Is the America Party going to be made up of H-1Bs and South Africans and a bunch of people who aren't actually American? Is it just the PayPal mafia and the tech lords fracturing the right into oblivion, infinity, over and over and over again? These are the things that we're going to discuss today, and we've invited a special guest, Jay Burden, to join the show. So tune in now. Right.
Welcome back.
Yep.
I love the tie.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't often do a tie, but when I do, it's immaculate.
It's a good tie.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we're pleased to join Jay. We both went on your show in the past couple weeks. I think you should definitely check those out. We're pleased to have you on the show for the first time. Thanks for coming. And if you could just introduce yourself and a little bit of what you do.
Yeah, sure, guys. Thank you so much for having me on. So my primary output is the Jay Burden Show. It's an interview show. Obviously, I've hosted both Joel and Todd here. But point is, right, I primarily talk to different figures on the right. While many of them are Christian, not all are, but certainly in conversation with many of the same ideas that you guys mentioned in your work.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to dive right in. I'm going to lay a little bit of the context here, Jay, just in the past month or so. So if you're tuning in, you've got 10 minutes. What are the most important things that I need to know about the America Party? But then I'm going to toss it right back to you for a little bit of the history, because this is an idea that has been around for a long time, right? How many times have we heard after every election? I think it was with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, there was a big, it was either the Libertarian candidate. I know there was Andrew Yang at one point of people saying, I don't like either option presented to me. We should make a third party. And just a month ago, Elon Musk, and practically, guys, the reason this matters, he's freaking rich. He has $400 billion. Lots of people have had the idea of, we need a third party. We need someone that represents us. We need to start something else. The difference with Elon Musk is that he owns one of the world's biggest news social media platforms, and he's worth $400 billion. He's powerfully influential. And just a month ago, June 5th, he put out a poll and he said, should a new political party be formed that represents the middle 80% of Americans? And he's kind of getting at this idea that the Democrat Party really, it only represents 10% of Americans. They're hyper left, they're woke, they're progressives. They would be closer to Marxist or communist. Then you have the hyper right on the right side. And he seems to think 80% of Americans, they're kind of in the middle. Medium-sized government, less taxes, cutting spending, all of that. And so he put that poll out a month ago. The response was for most of the participants that he should do it. How many of that was India, the Philippines, South America? How many of those were actually Americans? I would estimate less than half, if not less than a quarter of them. But the poll said it, and Elon Musk is a big believer in Vox Populi, Vox Dei. The voice of the people is the voice of God. And so he said that he's going to start it. He's going to have an initial kind of inaugural ball. But this party is going to not just represent, it's very difficult to make the assertion that's representing American interests. And we'll get to that kind of in the second segment. But it most certainly is kind of in a long line of the rise of the tech right. And so, Jay, I'm going to invite you on just to take it up from there. The tech right, and really where all this started, not just this year, but kind of been in the works for a while, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. So this sort of begs the question of what motivates political change, and not to get too much into the finer points of this, but effectively things change when rich people and powerful people want them to change. So initially, the tech section of the economy was completely and totally subservient to traditional finance capital, right? We think of Wall Street, this is who we're talking about, which had been, in the broad context of the 20th century, a roughly right-wing aligned bloc. That changed with Obama. Obama successfully won over a large portion of Wall Street to his coalition. And so for the tech guys, this sort of proved to be uncomfortable, because effectively the source of power, the way that these tech billionaires are billionaires, is that they need highly competent people to do difficult things. Now, look, I'm not going to pretend that being the CEO of Twitter is the same as being the CEO of, American Standard Oil, right? It's not a physical product in the same way, but they need competence as sort of the fuel to drive their economic engine. Obviously, this ran into woke policies dramatically. If you are required to hire certain people simply by virtue of how they were born, that doesn't do very well for a company that, as we've seen with X, can run on half a dozen highly competent people. So there were already sort of these signs that the tech faction of the economy was splintering away from the Democrats. Another part of this was the way that Democrats leaned on lawfare to accomplish their goals on social media. You may remember over and over and over again, the former CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, this Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, being dragged before these sort of liberal heretics over and over and over again to answer for the crime that was the 2016 election. And a lot of them got threatened with antitrust or with nationalization, threatened with very scary things for someone whose massive net worth is dependent on a single company. So the early signs of this have been going on for about 10 years, right? That tech would move away. Now, somewhat similarly, we've seen the rise of figures like Curtis Yarvin and Peter Thiel, the sort of, they call them dismissively in liberal media, right? Like the Silicon Valley tech bros who are flirting with more reactionary thought. So it was somewhat of a surprise, but if we look at the broader context, not entirely so, that Elon Musk would endorse Trump. Now, a personal detail about Musk that bears mention is, one, he is of South African extraction. Obviously, if you are South African, you have seen what, shall we say, radical egalitarianism does taken to its logical conclusion. And also, he had one of his sons transed. He had one of his children sort of stolen from him. And clearly that made him very angry. But this does not a conservative make. If you look at him, he very much is a sort of 90s libertarian, right? He's anti-woke, but he's by no means a social conservative. We see this in the platform of his new party. Now, obviously, going back to sort of the recent past, Elon endorsed Trump, and he was seen at almost all of his events. And it's just sort of memed with iconic images like Elon jumping up and down next to Trump on stage. And to give him credit, he went to work at the Department of Government Efficiency, devoting an incredible amount of his very valuable time to solving the deep state, right? To solving the bloat. Now, I want to say that Elon Musk is not necessarily synonymous with the tech right. There are other figures I mentioned, Peter Thiel among them, who are not necessarily aligned. Peter Thiel is sort of a mentor, might be too strong a word, but closely connected to Vice President J.D. Vance. And as we mentioned earlier, this sort of tech faction is, in relative terms, a new faction in politics. Traditionally, at least in the last 20 years or so, the Republicans have had two factions, sort of the military-industrial complex / Israel lobby. Those are not entirely the same, but for the sake of discussion, we'll bundle them together. And domestic energy concerns, right? Someone like Rex Tillerson. And so we sort of starting to see the birth of a new faction. And with that new faction, right, obviously there are these growing pains. So Musk devotes a great deal amount of time to Doge, decides to leave, and very quickly starts sort of taking pot shots at Trump. He had this, as the kids say, flame out on Twitter, X, excuse me, where he said Trump was on the Epstein flight logs that we have now been assured do not exist. But regardless, he said all sorts of crazy things about the president, retracted them, and now, this is the most recent development. He's starting the America Party. So as you've said earlier, this is sort of a moderate party. The problem is, right, who does this represent? And you teased earlier that it seems to be the favorite of H-1B visas, of sort of recent arrivals. But really, the problem is, and why I don't think this will go anywhere, if you are an immigrant, you have a party that is promising you much, much more, the Democrat Party. If you are anti-immigration, you have a party that is offering you much, much more. And so look, is there a fraction of people for whom this is exactly what they want? Yes. How large is that fraction? That is up for debate. And so, to be honest, and maybe this is sort of spoiling the conclusion of this whole stream, but I don't think this is going anywhere. Musk personally doesn't seem to be, shall we say, the most devoted to a single project over time. We see all of these sort of, honestly, even him buying X, right? It was supposed to be, a new free speech platform. And several years later, if you say certain things, you can still very much get kicked off. He is no longer actively managing that. Somewhat similar to Doge, right? He is no longer actively managing that. There are sort of all of these different projects. And as we've already seen, this tumultuous relationship between Trump and Musk has had multiple chapters to it, right? He's complained and then he's taken it back. And so I don't mean to discount the man, because obviously he's very competent and has accomplished a great deal with his intelligence. But I think that both on the level of, is this a project Musk can devote himself to for long enough for it to be a force in politics? I think that is unlikely. And given that, right, let's say he does it, will that be a meaningful force in the US election? I also say no, but I'll kick it back to you guys.
I like that angle, and I want to pick up on how you said the growth of the tech sector, it was fundamentally incompatible with kind of an old way of doing life. And that old way of doing life, for lack of a better term, is nepotism. You start a business, the business is successful. Sure, you could go shop around, you could take in resumes from all 50 United States and say, who would be best to be CEO or the operating officer of this company? But the traditional way of thinking was, I pass this down to my son, and my sons take this business. Now, again, that doesn't necessarily maximize your shareholder value. It doesn't necessarily help make you an international corporation, but there was this sense of continuity, and tech is ultimately opposed to that. But it's interesting because on the other side of things, if you take that kind of groundless, deracinated approach too far, if you take that too far, you get diversity politics. And then what you do with diversity politics is 25% of your workforce has to be black, 25% has to be Indian, 25% has to be women. And so on both sides, when you take it too far on the woke side, it's like, wait a second, this doesn't actually work. And then when you, at the same time, you're trying to do tech, but do it the classical American manufacturing way, you also end up with it not working either. And so tech by its very nature, not being a real product. I mean, software as a service. You could take Adobe Acrobat, sell it for $50, quite literally a billion times. It doesn't take energy, it doesn't take capital. You're just duplicating an installable file. And so the growth of the tech sector, like you said with Obama, he kind of captured Wall Street, has created this middle ground where you have millions and millions and millions of Americans. And what do they make that's of value? Like tech helps our lives, but it's not necessarily a real product. And the most profitable tech company, this is fascinating, by revenue, by employee, the most profitable tech company is OnlyFans. It requires like 30 some people to run a platform that is full of perversion. So we're saying the end goal, the ultimate tech company, even compared to NVIDIA per share, what does it make? It preys on people's most base desires, their most primal, their most sinful desires. And so this showdown with the tech world that we created in the last 20 years that was really profitable, giving people $300,000 salaries out of college, has now created a middle party, kind of not really on the MAGA side, definitely not on the left side, but it's probably going to end up splitting the vote.
Yeah, they've left the left, or the left left them, either way. But a lot of it was, I think, financial reasons, taxing, and the left just going crazy with, overriding free speech and those kinds of things, suppression of speech. But the right, a true right, especially like a paleoconservatism, doesn't fit at all, because you kind of, I don't know, for me, I'm a practical guy. So I tend to think of, okay, who are the type of people that are attracted to this world? Like, who is the software engineer? Who's the guy who's, working, with the PayPal mafia and now is working for this company or that company? And by and large, I'm sure there are some guys who are truly right-wing and, got their little homestead and live, on a rural plot of land and have a wife and 6 children. I'm sure there are some of them, and I'm sure they're stand-up gentlemen. But by and large, a lot of them are probably foreigners, or maybe second, at most third generation immigrants, and then some of them who are heritage Americans are still they're living in the high rise apartment in San Francisco or now in Austin or wherever it may be, but they're city folk. They're not really necessarily connected to anything tangible, anything physical, anything real. They're not connected to the land. And that really does change a person's psychology. I mean, they've done studies about, the voting patterns of individuals based off of how far away they live from the ground. Like if you live on the 20th story of, some high-rise apartment building, you are not conservative. It's very unlikely. Versus, people who actually spread out and have some land and actually touch grass. There's actually something to that. It's not just a cliche, without getting into grounding and things like that, but there might be something to that too. So the point is, I think that, this type of party, the type of person who it's attracting, is, they don't like the left because of the suppression of free speech, because of the taxation, because of those kinds of policies, economic policies. But they don't really agree with true American conservatives, because they're not true American conservatives. They don't agree on some of the cultural and sociological issues. And so I just think that, that represents probably a very powerful elite group, but I don't think a very large group. And so in a democratic system, I don't think they're going to do very well. I think they can, probably raise a ton of money and probably put out a lot of different, propaganda and make a splash, make some noise because of high profile elite status and, financial wealth and all those kinds of things. But in terms of representing a wide swath of people, I think Jay Burden's right. I don't think it's going anywhere. All right. Well,
and just one thing to add, I think it's important to, when we talk about conservatives, draw a distinction between what type of thing we are conserving. Are we conserving the people, the culture, the thing that made America what it is, or are we conserving its institutions? And effectively what Musk has said, and you see this from certain kind of post-IDW thinkers like James Lindsay and others, is the idea that the essence of what America is the institution of the American market, right? It's some sort of sloppily construed version of free market economics. That is the core of what it is to be America. That America is the best strip mall ever made. And if you are, like us, primarily interested in preserving the people that give rise to certain institutions, well, both of you are conservatives. You are both striving to conserve, to preserve something. but fundamentally you are going about completely separate goals. And I think that as we see the Republican Party transform into something more nativist, something more protectionist with regard to economics, that faction of the party that was primarily interested in sort of stoking the economic engine, right, of keeping that number ever growing, that GDP line going up, those people might well be feeling disaffected. Now, one of the things that I think is very important to mention is that the MAGA movement is sort of a cult of personality. I don't say that in necessarily a disparaging way, but the Republican Party has, for good or ill, become synonymous with one man, Donald J. Trump. And that has driven an immense amount of people into that tent, right? Many people who didn't vote, both the kind of classic example of working class whites, but also young voters, right? Particularly young male voters. And look, Elon can say memey things and repeat things that are funny on the internet, which may well win him some support, but he does not have the same pull, the same magnetic personality that you would need to lead an insurgency in that way. I mean, look, like I like Musk more than the average person. I think he's kind of funny, right? His sort of semi-autistic rant about salt caves that you may remember from a few months back about where we store all of our government pension information. That was kind of funny, but that does not a politician make. Obviously, he can't run for any number of reasons, but there is no real heir apparent. There is no face to this. And this is a problem we've seen in other countries as well, right? The right in the UK is absolutely fracturing. There are all these new, insurgent right-wing parties sort of countering their, in our vernacular, kind of rhinos, right? The Conservative Party. But these are all, one, incredibly fractious, and two, if they don't have a central figure, they're nothing. And again, this is something that I don't see Musk solving quickly. We know his friend, someone like Vivek, for example, and he's not someone who goes over with the kind of voters you would need to attack the Republicans from the right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the thing about Musk, and it seems a little bit reductionistic to boil it all down to religion and say this one key aspect that's off explains everything. You think even about his, be it Neuralink and be it the ability to, with the human brain and the body, do things that would not be capable, or even going to Mars, he has an outlook for humanity that is ultimately, it's about as good as it can get, but it's without Christ. Like he is pro-natalist. He wants to fix the problem of the declining birth rates. He's pro-human beings. It's funny, way back early on, if you read his biography from, I think it's Oliver Isaacson, he's arguing with the CEO of Google because the CEO of Google says if life makes the jump to silicon, who cares? And Elon Musk is like, hey, no, I actually care about humanity. But even still, without Christ and without that theological outlook, you see Elon Musk and you say, what's your goal for humanity? And it's like, we're widgets, but we're widgets in the stars. We go to Mars and we traverse and we build all these amazing things. But you kind of ask the question, for what? Okay, we've gone and we've done this. And what do we have at the end? You can achieve a goal, but realize in the process of it, you lost your humanity. So we could ship millions of people to Mars and we could strip cobalt and whatever other rare metals they are and bring them back to Earth. And it's like, but what do we have to come home to? We have Teslas that feel like, and I have a Tesla and I love it, but I mean, it feels like a robot. It's not your dad's 76 Chevy. So you go home to cars and homes and technology and living spaces that are artificial. They're not connected to the land. They're not connected to our past. And so without Christ, without saying, hey, what's the chief end of man? Well, first and foremost, it's to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. You end up with a kind of dystopian. We all have chips in our brain. We live on different planets where we have to use masks to breathe the air and terraform the atmosphere, where I think a lot of the traditionalists and a lot of those that look back to our European origins, first of all, for America, the founding fathers, the Puritans, we say they had a much different outlook for America. And it wasn't focused for sure on GDP, but it also was positively focused on the worship of the true God, the productivity of the home, the flourishing of the nation. And without that, and also without being American, I think Musk misses a lot of that.
Yep. Let's go to our first commercial break and we'll be right back. Hello, brothers in Christ. Let me ask you something real. Are you truly protecting and providing for your wife and children? Not just in this life, but the one to come. Here's a reality check. Only 45% of adults in America have life insurance, and of those, nearly 2/3 are underinsured. That's not good stewardship. And as Christian husbands and fathers, we're called to do better. But what if you could protect your family's future and wisely grow your wealth right now? That's where private family banking comes in. It's a proven strategy that allows you to leverage your existing cash flow, build tax-free legacy wealth, and give your family lasting security, all while aligning with your biblical call to provide and protect. This is what it looks like to turn post-mill talk into post-mill action. Tap the link in the show notes to book your free discovery call and take your next step toward financial discipleship and multi-generational impact. In the future, it may be hard to persuade people that what happened starting in the spring of 2020 really did happen. A fake pandemic was the signal that one morning began the foreclosure on everything that had, until the evening before, been central to the idea of democratic constitutional republics. The most shocking thing was not so much that this started to happen, but that almost no one seemed to object to it happening. Almost no one sought to defend the rights and liberties being overturned. Leftists clamored for more and more tyranny, while most conservatives fell silent. In this book, The Abolition of Reality, Irish dissident leader John Waters describes not merely what happened, but the meaning of what happened, in what may well be judged by history as the most heinous crime of all time. This book, as Winston in 1984 said, is for the future for the unborn. Get it from Western Front Books at the link below. That's www.westernfrontbooks.com. Again, that's www.westernfrontbooks.com. Looking for a God-honoring courtship for your young adult? Introducing covenantmatches.com. The exclusive, biblically grounded matchmaking platform for Trinitarian Christians who value purity, tradition, and parental guidance. No woke ideologies, no LGBTQ influence, just serious believers from approved states like Florida, Texas, and Tennessee, and soon vetted international members from nations like the Philippines, Mexico, and Poland. Parents and guardians, you're in control. Create profiles for your sons and daughters 18 years or older. Oversee the courtship process, and let our AI-generated avatars maintain modesty for you. No worldly dating app photos on this site. We uphold the statement of faith. Only Trinitarian Christians need apply. This is for those seeking true biblical courtship, not modern dating chaos. Launching in 20 states with international expansion coming soon. Secure your family's future with covenantmatches.com, where faith, tradition, and parental wisdom lead the way. Visit covenantmatches.com today, because godly marriages start with godly foundations. Again, that's covenantmatches.com.
All right. So welcome back. We talked in the first segment. Jay Burden gave an excellent overview of really this tech right, the tech faction, part of it just because our economy grew on technology in the last 20 years. And so it's been a conflict that's kind of been simmering under the surface. And now Elon Musk has the means. He has $400 billion. He has the means. He has the platform. He has the voice. And he has the influence to actually make this third party viable. Now, the reason third parties don't work, for example, libertarians, well, what if we all just went in on the libertarian candidate? Well, the problem is in a bipartisan system where you have Democrats and Republicans, is that reasonably speaking, you would need to get 50% plus one of a given House of Representatives, of given senators in a state, of given representatives across the nation to actually begin to actually positively legislate your agenda. So if you were the Libertarian Party, you're like, we want to cut taxes all across the United States. Well, you'd have to win about 220 seats across the United States. That's in the House of Representatives. You'd have to win about 50 senator slots across multiple races because senators aren't up for re-election every term. 50 senator slots, then plus one, obviously, either the vice president. In short, it's basically impossible in our bipartisan system for a third party to come in and to positively legislate. And Musk sees this, and he's a smart guy. And so this is what he's aiming to do. And Jay, I'm really interested in how you think this will practically play out. And so in early July, he stated this. He says, here's the deal. We're not going to focus all across the United States. We're not going to run, 100 Senate candidates, 400 House of Representative candidates, and a presidential candidate. At one point, he was even suggesting we might not run a presidential candidate. What he is going to do is say target 2 to 3 Senate seats and 8 to 10 House districts. And what those districts would do if he were to win is they would decide contentious votes. You saw this over the weekend with the big, beautiful bill. Basically, the Republicans, they wanted to get this bill across, they could only lose 3 votes. And so if you can imagine a block of just 5 votes, be that 5 representatives, 2 or 3 senators, interestingly enough, they would actually have the power to kill legislation. And so they could say, this won't pass without our approval. We are the American party. We're for reduced spending. And so we're going to say until this comes in under this level, or estimated to be this lower than this amount of spending, they could actually kill legislation. So Musk's goal is not to create a party again, competes for every House seat, competes for every Senate seat, but very targeted and attempting to kind of hold the keys such that one party wouldn't have above. In the Senate, you need 50. In the House, it's about 218, 215. You just wouldn't have that vote. And you would need that party's buy-in. You would need to go to the American Party and say, we will keep the deficit low so we get your support on this. Jay, you already played your hand a little bit in saying you're not sure how it'll work out. The constituency might not be there. But what do you think? Highly targeted, kind of being that deciding vote. What's the best case scenario maybe for how that goes?
Yeah, so this is something we see across Europe. Probably the best, most universal example is the coalition of green parties, which are, as you can imagine, not quite the sort of single issue parties focused on the environment. And generally, those tend to be part of left-wing coalitions. So you'll have your main center-left party in the UK, right? You'll have Labour. Then you'll have the Greens, who are a much smaller party, but still needed to get certain bills over the line. And generally, those tend to be, in the example of the Greens, in kind of hyper-partisan areas, like their college towns, just sort of translate. And they certainly do get some of what they want. Now, those countries are set up much differently than ours. They tend to work off of, obviously in the UK, like a prime ministerial system where you don't necessarily vote for a man, you vote for a party who selects a man. So obviously we have had third parties in the US, but not a very serious one in a very long time. To the point about could Elon Musk do this? Again, if there was ever someone who was going to, it would be him. He has effectively limitless resources. Although one of the interesting things, and perhaps the real motivation behind this split, not to read too much into it, is an immense amount of his personal valuation is tied up in Tesla. Now, Tesla has obviously been taking a beating as far as their public relations because of his association with Trump from their primary, I guess you would say, user base, which is people who want electric cars and care some about the environment. Now, obviously, as Musk comes out as a quote-unquote Nazi, that's gone away. Now, certainly, there are some Trump supporters who are, supporting Elon, but he seems to have burnt that bridge, which again leaves his store of wealth vastly diminished as sales will go down. But another part of this is that one big beautiful bill has radically slashed the government subsidies to electric car manufacturers and also slashed the regulation on the auto industry. There's a very real debate to what degree electric cars are a real product, right? Would they be profitable? Would people want to buy them if there weren't nearly $10,000 in federal tax credits, if there weren't all of these artificial benefits? Now, the reason I bring that up is because when we say Musk has $400 billion, we don't mean that he has a bank account with that many zeros. Right. That's sort of a current estimation of his net worth. Now, what we saw when he tried to buy X is that liquidating that net worth is a very difficult thing to do. Interestingly enough, he didn't outright buy it. He bought a large portion of it, and there were outside investors who poured in their money. So point is, if Tesla takes a big hit, which it already has, the subsidies go away. Furthering that, how many resources can he pull from? Still a lot, right? Still an immense amount. We've seen Ross Perot relatively recently with much less money accomplish a great bit, but still, right? That means that his prospective war chest is going down. Now, let's scale this against the actual requirements. I'll use one example. APAC paid Ted Cruz about $1 million a year, plus or minus. Not directly, of course, but we understand how Washington works. And he is, as evidenced by his interaction with Tucker Carlson, among others, slavishly devoted to our greatest ally. Heavy scare quotes there. So if it takes $1 million to own a senator, maybe it takes a little more than that to install your own. But Musk could, if he were going about this differently, just result to straight up bribery, right? Or legalized bribery. So point is, that would be doable, right? The ability to push senators his way one way or another, or the ability to simply airdrop candidates in. He will have the money to do that. But the question comes back to is there an electorate in order to do so? Because I'll be honest, I don't remember the name of the last Libertarian Party candidate, but something tells me if you gave the Libertarians 10x their current budget, they still wouldn't have a president. Like, those policies simply are not popular. They don't have a base. And so we obviously don't know. Musk has said he's going to do this. He said he was going to do a great number of things. But he would, if he gets exactly what he wants, be able to form sort of the Republican version of the UK Green Party, right? A secondary interest group that could stymie in the future, right, Republican endeavors to get certain things done. And so, look, that's a very real problem. Now, I will say both the Republicans and the Democrats have a number of, shall we say, circuit breakers built into the system. Obviously, the Republicans saw what happened with Ross Perot getting Bill Clinton elected. The Democrats have been just screwing over Bernie Sanders for decades at this point. They are well capable of quashing down insurgencies. So this will be a fight because not just our friends in the Republican Party, but obviously even the worst rhinos in the world don't want this to happen. So Musk will be facing quite a fight. And to be honest, I think the other problem of being tainted as the party of foreigners, right, a literal foreign billionaire, will not do him any favors.
Real quick, so Jay, something happened during our commercial break with it sounds like your volume is just coming through your computer speaker or your phone, that your mic maybe got unplugged, something like that. So we're going to go ahead and go to our second commercial break, and maybe you can just do a little bit of troubleshooting, and we will come right back. Corrected. Yep, there it is. Great. All right, let's go to our second commercial break, and we'll come back and continue the conversation.
The danger of centralized power is often represented by the word king. As Americans, we hate the word king. Civilian ownership of body armor is about helping people to have increased power to resist tyrants and criminals. And so, Armored Republic is about helping you to preserve your God-given rights to the honor of the Lord Jesus Christ, because he is the King of Kings, and he governs kings and he will judge them. This is Armored Republic, and in a republic, there is no king but Christ. We are free craftsmen, and we are honored to be your armorsmith of choice.
Running your business with purpose means looking beyond last month's numbers to next year's vision. Kaylee Smith offers CFO-level strategy scaled just for small businesses. At Midstate Accounting, she takes care of your compliance, bookkeeping, and tax returns while providing holistic advisory and fractional CFO services to help you steward your resources with a distinctly Christian perspective. Ready to align your finances with your future? Then call Kaylee Smith at 573 889-7278 for a free, no obligation consultation. Mention the Right Response podcast to get 10% off your first 3 months. Prefer to explore online? Then you can visit midstateaccounting.net to learn more or schedule a call. Again, that's midstateaccounting.net. With Midstate Accounting, you'll plan for tomorrow while operating in faith today. So call Kaylee Smith at 573-889-7278. Again, that's 573-889-7278. Heaven's Harvest takes pride in providing you with the best freeze-dried emergency survival food kits on the market. Their kits stand out because they prioritize serving sizes and calories that will sustain you for the long haul. No gimmicks, no fillers, just a diverse array of nutritious options that will pleasantly surprise you. But they're more than just emergency food. They're advocates for sustainable preparedness. Their heirloom seed kits include heirloom, non-GMO, non-hybrid, open-pollinated seeds, ensuring that your garden produces the same quality and variety year after year. Packaged in high-grade mylar foil, their seeds have a 10-year shelf life. So get 10% off your Heaven's Harvest order by using our special discount code RRM at checkout or by clicking the link in the description below. Made in the USA and free shipping on orders above $99 for the US only.
All right. Welcome back to our third segment. I think it's helpful to give a little bit of defensive, just we kind of land the plane here. We're talking about a new party being formed, and this is really one of the most, I want to say groundbreaking maybe wouldn't be the best term for it, but it's one of the most important things that has happened in American politics in a while. The best chance at a third party was Teddy Roosevelt with the Bull Moose Party, and this was over 100 years ago. And so it's been about 100 years at least since there's been any serious consideration of an actual alternative to kind of whatever slop the Democrat Party or the Republican Party serves up to you in the midterms. But practically speaking, and Jay, welcome your thoughts on this, I think we would all kind of agree that we're not voting our way out of this, that we're not just an election or two away, and with the right vote and the right turnout, the majority of the country is common sense, and they need to be motivated, and they need to see people that hold their values up in public. They'll come out and vote, and we'll be back and have everything fixed. There is no going back. We need a politics of, in many ways, the future. But practically, I don't think we're voting our way out of this. However, well, why show up and vote at all then? Why not be accelerationist? Why not hope things get worse? Why not vote for Kamala Harris and say, well, she's going to make things worse and that will speed up the decline and then we'll get something new birthed out of it. Right. I think the longer you go, the more runway you can have is the better chance we have of the plane taking off.
Yeah, we're not accelerationists, just for the record. I think that's important for people to recognize. We want as much time as we can because first and foremost, before caring about American politics, which we do care because we love this country, but I'll speak for myself. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a local pastor, and so the idea of accelerationist strategies where there would be potentially civil war that goes hot or blood in the streets or those kinds of things do not appeal to me as a husband and a father and a pastor. And so we want as much time as the Lord might be gracious enough to provide, even just at local levels and just interpersonal, households to be able to move out of cities and to be able to position themselves financially in a place that's more secure and more viable, so that if things do eventually run hot, that the righteous, that the people of God would be able to endure and persevere through that they would be better positioned, which if you're a husband, father, Christian man listening to this, that should be your goal. We've got 4 years at this point, 3.5 with Trump. We don't know what's going to happen next. And so I think that we may experience some economic boom, but it could be short-lived. And so I think, utilizing whatever providence the Lord would be kind enough to give you to make wise investments, to buy physical, tangible goods, to buy property, to move away from cities, those kinds of, to bring your wife back home and off the corporate plantation, that she can actually build your your net worth, that she's actually building, like the proverb says, a good woman, a wise woman builds up her house. Whereas today, because of feminism, we have women who are building up another man's house by working for House Musk, or House Bezos, or House, but it is somebody's house. These are households with servants, and you're building your own wealth or somebody else's. So utilize the time as much as you can. But Wes is absolutely right, and we've talked about this at length in past episodes, that we are not accelerationists. We want God to be kind, and give us as much time as we can at a personal, individual level, household level, to position ourselves well for the future. But at the same time, we also recognize that the nothing ever happens bros. It's a safe bet. You're going to be right probably 99.9% of the time, but eventually things do happen. We can look at history, and if you pan out far enough, what you realize is that when it rains, it pours, and pretty much every 80 years or 120 or 150, something significant happens. And it does feel as though, our spidey sense has been tingling for a couple of years now, like there's something that's coming down the pipeline. And so being prepared for that and recognizing, I don't think we're going to vote our way out of it. That doesn't mean that America's over. That doesn't mean that God is done especially with his people, Christians here in this country. But something drastic is probably going to have to change, and I don't think we're going to democracy our way out of the mess that democracy has actually created. So be patient, play the long game, position you and your family wisely, but then also be watchful and be prepared for something to happen. I don't think it's going to be a third party. I don't think that's what's going to shake things up, but something is probably going to happen. So we'll give the final word now to our guest. Jay, we appreciate you coming on the show. Maybe you could just answer the question of, in the specific predictions, like short-term, near-term predictions for the America Party and how that's going to play out, what effect that might have, and then maybe macro, what do you think is going to happen to these United States of ours? What if this isn't what makes the change? What do you think eventually? Stupid is not viable. What cannot continue won't, and so something is going to change. I don't think it's going to be us voting our way out, but I'd love to hear any predictions you might have about what the shakeup in the future might look like.
Yeah, sure. So I just want to echo your sentiments there. There is no voting our way out of this. And even if you look at the presuppositions of the America Party, it's the idea that if we just do what the sort of central, middle section of the bell curve of America wants to do, we can get out of this. That's not true. Right? We had a cultural consensus post-World War II, and it led us exactly to the position we are currently in. That's almost tautological to say, but fundamentally, we are facing very real problems. Right? We are not reproducing. There are massive economic problems. There's a decay of the very concept of an American identity. And these are very real issues. These are not simply things you can have one 4-year election to fix. It took a long time to appear. These cracks have been widened, and it will take decades to fix them. And so from that perspective of even if Elon gets exactly what he wants, will it solve any of these problems? The answer is no, clearly not. To your point about accelerationism, I echo those sentiments because look, we live here. We should not, as a phrase that has been just completely battered and overused, immunitize the eschaton, right? Hasten the end of the world. And so to me, I look at Musk as ultimately doomed in the sense that his ideas are futile. They are unlikely to work. If they do, he will accomplish none of his ultimate goals because the problems that we are facing are much deeper than one or two sort of cycles of bad policy. Well, there certainly are policy issues. We've seen Trump undo a lot of very stupid decisions that certainly make our lives better. But fundamentally, there are much deeper issues. We could say cultural, identitarian rules, disagreements about why we as a society exist that will not be answered by going back to a consensus of a previous time. sure, I realize I wasn't alive for them, but the 1990s were very pleasant, right? They were a good time to be a young American. But the politics of that time led us to the place we are today. Our modern day leftists are simply the logical conclusion of a previous era's liberalism. And so this vain idea you see from Musk, you see from Lindsay, you see from any one of these figures is just to turn back the clock to a time in which things were more comfortable, things were more profitable, right? If we want to look at it more cynically. And sure, if we could, get into a civilizational time machine, we would have those good years again. But you can't forget what happened afterwards, right? You can't forget that the culture of 1992 led to the culture of 2022, right? They are linked. And so to me, again, I think that he is ultimately looking at a Sisyphean task. And the branding of the accepting the future, right, of striving boldly for it, I think is particularly stupid, because that's the exact opposite of what he's doing. He's returning to a previous order. He is, in fact, weirdly enough, perhaps the most conservative man in politics, right? Genuinely looking to, and I realize I'm sort of joking there, right? But wind the clock back. And all of these issues that you've mentioned, that we have mentioned in our previous discussions, they're very real, right? These are the things that are making our civilization sick. And unless addressed, these will be fatal, right? These can and these have killed other empires before. And I think it is unwise to assume that America is exceptional in that way, right? We are a country, and fundamentally the same physics that applied to the Romans, the Greeks, pick your favorite civilization, apply to us. And so to me, I think that Musk is ultimately incredibly naive. He believes the version of civics that was taught to all of us in high school, which we have seen time and time again. Just look at the last 3 elections alone. That's not how the real world works. And so I'm not saying we should vote for Kamala Harris to lean into the curve, right? To bust out the other side. We have individually a relatively small portion of power, and the responsible things to do as a steward is to use your 5 talents well, right? To sort of butcher a biblical analogy. And so to me, I see no reason whatsoever to vote for Elon's candidates, right? It can, even if he gets as much power as he could wildly imagine, it will not solve any problems for us. It will not solve any problems for America. It will at best make him and his friends richer. And to be honest, I don't think that's a worthy use of, our small fraction of power in the system.
Yeah,
I agree. So I think that's pretty well said in terms of how this party thing, America Party is going to play out. But in the macro, so what is the solution? What do you think is going to happen? And what do you think needs to happen to actually shake things up, where we actually have a fighting chance of returning, not to the 1990s, but a little bit further back than that?
Yeah, sure. So fundamentally, and this is a little bit reductive, but we'll go with it anyway, there are sort of 2 categories of human organization. There are ones that work and ones that don't. Our current order, whether you want to call it the post-war consensus or whatever, it is not working. It is falling apart and has been around for roughly 80 years. There are other forms of governance, many of whom I don't particularly like, that have lasted for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Right? There are ways people have organized themselves through time that have produced societies that met the bare minimum requirement of reproducing, right, of continuing into the future. Very clearly, our current one is unable to do that. And so, to be honest, I think when we talk about return, that's what we're talking about, right? A return to sanity, a return to a time in which we organized ourselves in a way that people have historically organized. Now, I realize that doesn't necessarily help a individual person, so I'll break it down slightly more. To be honest, right, we need to be intentional about our communities, right? How we live our day-to-day lives. None of us, maybe there is someone here who has an immense amount of power, in which case, please send me an email. But in all seriousness, right, we have relatively limited agency, right, compared to the head of a state, for example. But within that, there are choices you can make which make your community better. Well, first of all, right, find a community. There are a number of ways to do that. But that community becomes your priority, right? One of the great ills of the latter half of the 20th century is the focus on you yourself as an atomized individual. Now, this is not communism, right? This is not saying, we all serve, the organized collective in that sense. But the idea that, there is a group of people organized around something eternal, whether that be your relationship to God or your culture or something else, right, is bigger than you. It is more important than what do I want to do with my life at any given moment. And those are the sort of things which are, one, strong enough to survive a system sort of coming to its end. And that doesn't mean Mad Max, right? That just means that, the capacity of the system to work, right, to make good on its promises goes away. And so to me, I think that those sort of communities, those intentional communities designed to explicitly, right, resist the evils of modernity, are the places where you should be focusing your time. Right. There are a great number of religious communities. I realize there are very real problems with the Amish, for example, but that is a culture that has survived. I don't want to be Amish for any number of reasons, but fundamentally, there is a model to how to survive. Now,
And have kids.
A part of this, and have kids, right? How to propagate, how to make sure your civilization carries on into the future. Another example, right, is the Boers of South Africa. They have gone through extraordinary persecutions, both in the kind of current instantiation post 94, but also from the British, right, the origin of the phrase concentration camp. And that is a definite culture tied to a place that has survived. And so these are the places I think we should be looking for inspiration. There are a great number of people who've already started on this work, and it doesn't need to be something dramatic as deciding all technology after 1860 was evil and should be avoided. But basically devoting yourself to a community, an idea bigger than yourself, right? I mean, this is very much what we see in Scripture, right? The idea of, devoting yourself to obviously Christ, but to something more than the simple gratification of yourself. And again, as we see the America Party continually talk about freedom, right? What is their vision of freedom? It is effectively atomized individualism. And so to me, that I think is very at a base level what needs to be rejected. And if we are going to counteract this deep civilizational ill, what needs to be, cut out effectively. And I realize it's sort of weird to go about that deliberately because for our ancestors, it was just how they lived. But that is the situation in which we find ourselves.
Yeah. I tell people a lot. I think on a long enough timeline, you give us infinite time, we win. We're the ones having children. We're the ones building things that actually work. We're the ones that are writing and producing. So you give us a long enough runway and this plane will take off. But all the way back to a third party, well, why vote then? Like almost none of the politicians across the entire United States, I could probably count on two hands the amount that would truly represent my interests, my family's interests, the Christian faith in a way that I would agree with. Well, why vote at all? To make the runway longer. To give us decades for our children to get into power, for our children to accrue wealth, for us to close the border, to kick people out. You just need time to do that. And so voting can feel kind of silly, like this seems to be doing nothing. But if you can just hold at bay evil, again, for a couple decades, I actually think we win. Our message is simple. Our message is true. Our message, people look at it and they're like, why are young men being radicalized on all of these different platforms? Because pointing out that men and women are different and men should be the ones in charge of society, that's not hard to explain. They hear that and they say, of course, that makes sense. So on a long enough timeline, we win. We just need to have the time to do it. Yeah.
Was God cruel in granting Hezekiah, an extra added length of life? Or, you think of like in the case of Jesus raising Lazarus, it's like Lazarus, you get to come back to life, and he's one of the few guys in biblical history that gets to die twice. So like, is it cruelty? And the answer is, of course, no. It's like, well, what was the point? Hezekiah still died. What was the point? Lazarus still died. Well, the point was more life. And able to bring more glory to God, able to do more good, that it actually matters. So it's like, well, you're just prolonging the inevitable. Okay, well, I want to think about the big picture and what's going to happen, in centuries or even longer if the Lord tarries. But again, as a husband and father, it matters a great deal what happens in the next 20 years. I care about my great-great-grandchildren, but because I'm a finite human being, it's not just fallenness or related to sin, but just the finitude of creatureliness and the way that God designed us. I care immensely more about my children, my immediate family, the kids that I'm picking up and I'm holding, and for their sake, winning in 250 years is not nearly as productive and beneficial directly for them as winning in the next 20 years. So having time for my children to grow and to get married and to get situated and to get homes and those kinds of things makes all the difference in the world. And so I think that should be our mindset, is staying engaged, continuing to participate even in a losing system, to stave off disaster for as long as the Lord might grant us, to love our children well, provide for them, position them, and then hope that when the inevitable finally comes, in whatever form it comes in, something will eventually change, because stupid can't go on forever. And so eventually there will be change, and it will probably be somewhat dramatic. It probably will be abrupt. I don't think it's going to be this smooth takeoff into a new season, of America's history. It'll probably be a shaking kind of moment. But for that shaking to come at a time where Christians are well positioned to endure it, makes all the difference in the world. And so I think that should be our heart, is preaching the truth and being honest and saying the things that other people are unwilling to say, and simultaneously doing the meticulous and often boring work of participating in elections, especially local elections, even for candidates that aren't our favorite, but are significantly, distinctly better than the alternative. And then, as family men and churchmen, positioning our communities and our families in the best possible advantage that they could have. And I think those are the marching orders. That's what we can do for now, and we do it all for the glory of God, believing that our work is not in vain, but that our labor actually will, in due season, bear fruit. So, Jay, thanks for coming on the show. We are privileged to have you. I hope for the listener that you've enjoyed this episode. Tell our listeners where they can follow you.
Yeah, sure. So as I said earlier, my primary output is the Jay Burden Show, which you can find on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Normally free of the technical difficulties that have unfortunately plagued my appearance on y'all's show. You can also find me on Substack under the same name. As we've said earlier, I've interviewed both of these fine gentlemen here. Very good episodes, as well as other people you might recognize. Again, guys, I appreciate the opportunity. It was a ton of fun.
Great. Thanks. All right. Well, Lord willing, we will see all of you guys on Wednesday. If you're new to the channel, go ahead and subscribe on YouTube and click the bell so you'll be notified with all the content that we produce. Our regular schedule is Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays is our live stream at 3 p.m. Central Time. We live stream simultaneously both on YouTube and on X. If you want to follow us on X, the handle is @RightResponseM. @RightResponseM, you'll get all of my midnight random commentary tweets, just sending them out into the ether and see what happens, but plus all of our videos. So the live stream is on X and YouTube, 3 p.m. Central Time, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then we also have one more show that we do weekly. We call it the Friday Special, and that's every Friday at 8 p.m. Central Time. And we just started a brand new season. This is for Q3, season 3 of this year. And that's with myself and Dr. Stephen Wolf on all things related to Christian nationalism and why we're against multiculturalism and some of the things that we're talking about in our episode today. What does America have to do in order to survive and repent and return? So be sure to check that out. The first episode just dropped this last Friday, so you can go and find that on YouTube and catch up. We're also on Apple and Spotify, and episode 2 with Stephen Wolf will drop this Friday at 8 p.m. So thanks for tuning in, and Lord willing, we'll see everybody on Wednesday.